Welcome to Beyond the Medical Algorithm, a podcast by the Philly Wellness Center. Join us on a journey through the too often neglected path to wellness, where we celebrate the human body and all things natural to illuminate new roads to health and happiness. Holistic is the name of the game, and I'll be talking to fellow experts and enthusiasts to rejoice in healing and revolutionize the way we approach therapy. I'm your host, Catie Harris. Hi, everybody. On today's episode of Beyond the Medical Algorithm, we're excited to welcome Dr. Heather Sandison, a renowned naturopathic doctor and trailblazer in the treatment of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. Dr. Sandison is the New York Times best-selling author of Reversing Alzheimer's, the new toolkit to improve cognition and protect brain health. She is a renowned naturopathic doctor specializing in neurocognitive medicine and the founder of Sulceri Health Clinic, a premier brain optimization clinic based in San Diego, and Marama, a residential program turning memory care into memory recovery. Dr. Sandison has dedicated her career to supporting those suffering with dementia and is the primary author of peer-reviewed, research-published article in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. She is shattering common misconceptions about Alzheimer's, teaching lifestyle change protocols that keep your brain sharp at any age. Welcome, Dr. Sandison.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Catie.
Yeah, this is all near and dear to my heart. I spent the last 25 years in neurocritical care and neurological issues. So I'm really excited for this today. So maybe you could start out and tell us what initially inspired you to specialize in Alzheimer's disease and dementia care.
Yeah, really what happened was in my training, I was told over and over again, there was nothing you could do for Alzheimer's. I'm sure you heard the same thing, right? To suggest that there was something that we could do to help a patient who was suffering with cognitive decline associated with aging we were told it was to give people false hope. And so to not do that, that would actually do more harm than good. And then just a year or two out of training, I came across Dr. Bredesen, who's since become my primary mentor. And he gave a talk at an integrative mental health conference. And the way he presented the information, basically saying that you could reverse the symptoms of Alzheimer's. And I was like, I'm sorry, wait, what? Like, this is not what I've been told. And then instead of blowing him off, as I listened, I realized, oh, he's talking about all of the skills that I learned in naturopathic medicine of detox, hormone support, managing all of the lifestyle factors of diet, exercise, sleep, and stress management. He's talking about getting rid of stealth infections. He was basically putting all of my toolkit together to support someone at the cellular level of their brain, at the neuronal level. If we take all of the junk out and then put all the good stuff in and make sure their nutrients are balanced, he suggested that we would see improvements in the symptoms of Alzheimer's. And so I kind of was like, wait, really? Like, I was totally skeptical. But I thought to myself, if I could treat someone with Alzheimer's successfully, even some of the time, I could reduce a significant amount of suffering, not just for the patient, but for their family members. You could reduce a lot of the costs. This disease can be bankrupting emotionally, financially, of course, but physically exhausting. And so my thought was that, one, if I could do this, everything else would seem easy. And two, if we could do this, we could really make a dent in an area of medicine where there is not a meaningful medication. There's no meaningful pharmaceutical treatment or intervention available to people. And so there's this massive gap and this huge opportunity to really impact people's lives for the better if we could do something positive here. So that was what inspired me. When I went back to my clinical practice and was on Dr. Bredesen's list of trained providers, this was right about the time that his book, The End of Alzheimer's, came out, and to much acclaim. And it was very popular very quickly. And so we had people showing up in my office. They were looking for providers who were on his list. And I think at that point, I was probably the only person in San Diego. And so we had people showing up, and they had more confidence in this approach than I had. But they proved to me how much better people could get and how quickly. It was just astounding. My very first patient, Darlene, she came in with a MoCA of 2. So a MoCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, is one of the ways that we test where someone is on that spectrum of cognitive decline. And a normal score is 26 and above. It's out of 30. So 30 is a perfect score. 26 and above is normal. And she had a MoCA score of 2. So just answering questions with maybe yes or no. I mean, severe dementia. absolutely completely dependent on her husband for toileting, for, of course, feeding herself. I think she was really into clothes. And so she would continue to get herself dressed, but it probably dressed herself like my toddler does, right? Not always matching, but she had this bright smile. And her husband would say how into clothes she was. She was always really into fashion and design. And she had been a school teacher and she had this big, beautiful handwriting. But the first day, it was very cramped and at an angle, and you couldn't read it. She came back just 7 weeks later. And as I mentioned, her husband was somebody who had way more confidence than I did. So he dove in fully. He wasn't just dipping his toe in the water, but they did it all. They got out of their moldy bedroom and actually moved into the living room of their home. They started ballroom dancing a few days a week, even though she couldn't fully keep up. They just did what they could. They showed up. They had a good time. They laughed. They were walking up and down hills every day. They got on a ketogenic diet. She got all of her dental issues addressed. She got mercury amalgams out and root canals extracted. And she got her dental work addressed fully by a biological dentist. They got on all the supplements. I followed the Bredesen Protocol and got them everything they needed, but they put it into practice. They did the work. And then 6 weeks later, she showed up and her MOCA score was a 7. She had dramatically improved. Now, she wasn't going back to work, but it had only been 6 weeks. And the first thing that happened, I was like in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to be possible. And so I looked at her husband and I was like, did we do the test wrong? Did we mess something up? And he's like, no, she's different. She's better. Listen to her. She's talking in full sentences. And I started bawling. Like it was just so emotionally moving. And then I couldn't help but think, like, what about everyone else? What about everybody who hasn't gotten here yet? What about people who have genetic risk? Like how we can reduce so much suffering. And so basically since then, I've been telling everyone who will listen, like, hey, this is possible. We know how to do this. Dr. Bredesen's work works. Let's put it into action. And so that's really my work in the world, is sharing what I've seen clinically in the residential care facility, what we've seen in the research, and what we've seen in our coaching programs, and just changing the narrative around what's possible for those living and suffering with dementia. It's not for everyone. It takes a lot of hard work. Darlene and her husband, they did a lot and they spent money. It's not an easy pill. It's not a pill you swallow or an IV you take once a week. This is something that requires a lot of work and investment. So it won't be for everyone. And everyone should know that there's an option.
Honestly, this is the first time I've actually heard of the Bredesen Protocol. So maybe I'm just not up on things, or I mean, that's amazing. And maybe I'm like you when you did this the first time, and it's just kind of like, really? Because we've been so ingrained to believe that there's nothing to be done, that anything that can be done doesn't seem real.
Absolutely. And Catie, even these days, I mean, every time someone gets better, I do a little happy wiggle because I'm like, oh my God, it works. It's like I have to be reminded because it doesn't work every time. There are people it doesn't work for. But what we saw in the research, so there's been 3 significant research studies done over the past few years. And I'd love to share with your audience kind of what that looks like. So in 2022, Kat Toops and Dr. Bredesen's team, they published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease a 25 participant trial. And what they did, this was a feasibility trial that they did over 9 months. So 25 participants over 9 months with MOCA scores down to 19. So again, 26 and above is normal, 30 is perfect. So MOCA scores were down to 19, but they weren't super severe cognitive decline, not diagnosed Alzheimer's, but more in that mild cognitive impairment stage, which is still, that's past the pathophysiological changes that start before we're symptomatic. That's past beyond those early symptomatic stages where it's not measurable. This is now measurable cognitive impairment. So this is real, but not at that Alzheimer's stage. And what they saw was that 84% of those participants improved their cognitive function compared to baseline after 9 months of this intervention. Now, a year later, we published our work. We took 23 participants through a 6-month intervention, a very similar intervention, slight differences, but the Bredesen approach, essentially all of functional medicine, all of naturopathic medicine thrown at somebody with cognitive decline. So again, we had 23 participants compared to their 25. We did a 6-month intervention compared to their 9-month intervention. And our MOCA scores, we only included people in the trial who had MOCA scores between 12 and 23. So they had gone down to 19, but not beyond that. So we took people who had more advanced decline, more advanced disease, and we saw that 74% of them improved their cognition significantly. And We had statistically significant increases across the means of all participants included in the trial in overall composite cognition as measured on the Cambridge Brain Sciences battery of cognitive testing, in memory specifically on Cambridge Brain Sciences, in MoCA scores as well, also in quality of life scores and sleep scores. We saw statistically significant improvements in the means of all participants included in the trial. So these are really exciting results. Now, very recently, just in June of 2024, Dr. Dean Ornish, who many people might associate with heart disease, he's out of UCSF, he published a trial that was just 5 months long. So we talked about the 2022 trial that was 9 months long, my trial that was 6 months long. Dean Ornish's trial was just 5 months long. And this was the first randomized control trial. So there was a treatment group and a control group. And in their treatment group, what they did was different from what we did, but it was a lifestyle intervention. And they showed, I actually am going to read you the conclusions of this from the abstract because it just gives me chills every time and it makes me so happy. Comprehensive lifestyle changes may significantly improve cognition and function after 20 weeks or 5 months in many patients with mild cognitive impairment or early dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. And their intervention was slightly different. They did a vegan diet where we did organic ketogenic diets. We did more functional medicine. So we looked for toxins and infections and nutrient imbalances, where they did mostly just lifestyle. They did use supplements, but they had stress management and sleep and exercise and dietary changes. And they saw improvements compared to the control group. Our different approaches have not been compared head to head, and I hope that that happens over time. But what we see is that in a disease process, a complex disease process that affects the brain that causes neurodegenerative disease as we age, we can use things that are in our control. We can change our lifestyle and we can get improvements in cognitive function. And we see this over and over again. I gave examples of 3 different trials. We see this when we do exercise alone. We see this when we do meditation alone. But when we start stacking these things on top of each other, we get an even bigger benefit. And so this is just such an exciting time. There's so much room and so much reason for hope when it comes to Alzheimer's disease as we age.
I love this. And one of the questions that it begs is like, why is this not standard of care? And because it's something that's so simple that people could do. And I know when I went to school, the whole lifestyle changes, it was like the last line on the very last PowerPoint slide of a comprehensive pharmacological way to treat diseases. Here's all the pharmacological things. Oh, and by the way, institute some comprehensive lifestyle changes. And you're always like, well, what does that mean exactly? Like, that's a big thing to say at the end of a PowerPoint. And yet it's had such a significant impact on a disease that we previously couldn't treat.
There's a great book called How Not to Study a Disease, The Story of Alzheimer's by Carl Harroup, who is a researcher in the field. And essentially, we need a paradigm shift. Like, I've got a houseplant behind me, right? If my houseplant isn't doing well, I don't look at it and say, misfolded proteins are the problem. Let's get rid of the misfolded proteins. You would never do that. You would say, is it getting enough light? Is it getting enough water? Is it being poisoned? Does it have enough nutrients? Whenever you have a complex organism that's not doing well, you think about all of the inputs and all of the outputs, and is there balance in the homeodynamic system? Like, that's just common sense. But the paradigm of research is single molecule, single variable interventions that you can patent. There is a perverse incentive structure in the pharmaceutical industry. And also, I think in insurance and the way that we do doctoring these days, you've got 7 minutes with a patient and you give them the medication that's associated with the diagnosis. And that diagnosis, I think, has also been oversimplified. It's what are the symptoms? Okay, what's the diagnosis that fits those symptoms? Not why. Why does this patient in front of me have memory loss? Is it the misfolded proteins? No, it's what triggered the misfolded proteins. We need to go upstream from that. And the systems are not set up to ask those questions, answer those questions, or get patients the support they need to answer them. So I think there's a reckoning with the medical system, with the food system, what the foods that are available, that are affordable, that are convenient in this day and age are highly processed, highly palatable, and they cause diabetes, obesity, dementia, heart disease. They cause the chronic diseases associated with aging. And so there's a reckoning that we need to have with the way society is set up.
Yeah. And you've mentioned food and your lifestyle changes with Dr. Ornish doing vegan and your group doing ketogenic. What is it about the ketogenic diet?
Science is still answering this question around the mechanism, but there's a handful of things at play here. So, one, the brain is 2% of our body weight and takes up 20% of our energy expenditure every day, a huge amount of energy. And as we age, regardless of our diabetes status, we get less good, less efficient at turning glucose, sugar, carbohydrates into fuel, into ATP. And part of that has to do with insulin resistance, but these incredible, I mean, the human body just blows my mind, right? I have such a reverence for how incredible it is. And we're essentially like hybrid engines. We can switch from burning glucose, sugar, carbohydrates, those can be used interchangeably, burning fat or ketones for fuel. And when we switch to burning ketones for fuel, we burn those quite efficiently, even when we're older. So we can get back that metabolic flexibility by going back and forth between ketosis and glycolysis, burning fat for fuel and burning sugar for fuel. Now, when we're in ketosis, we create less oxidative stress. It actually is a detoxifying diet because we're mobilizing fats, and many of our toxins are fat soluble. So once we start mobilizing that, we can actually get rid of a lot of fat soluble toxins that we've been harboring. And then additionally, there seems to be, Dr. Gunju talks about how there's this mitochondrial uncoupling. And so it seems like there's other mechanisms that are still to be elucidated over time through the research, but there's quite a few mechanisms at play. Brant Courtwright, who is a friend of mine, lovely man, he wrote a book called The Neurogenesis Diet and Lifestyle, and he talks a lot about some of these proposed mechanisms for why the ketogenic diet is so particularly helpful for brain healing. So for those suffering with cognitive decline, I typically recommend that they get solidly into ketosis for 3 to 6 months. And then you want to be in ketosis more than you're not after that. So for some people, logistics come into play. You go to Italy and you want to have some gelato and some pasta, or you go to a wedding or something. So you plan to get out of ketosis then. And then when you get back, you're very intentional about getting back into ketosis. And I would say overarching dietary advice is that you avoid processed foods, especially ultra processed foods. So if it has an ingredient on the nutrition label that you wouldn't have in your pantry, don't eat it. And that change alone, I think, can have a big impact on health overall. But then getting that metabolic flexibility of going back and forth in and out of ketosis. And then when you're not in ketosis, maybe going in the direction of plant-based or vegan, but still non-processed, I think ultimately we'll find that that's one of the best diets for brain health. But there's something magic about getting into ketosis because we watch that people will go from not remembering their grandchildren's names to 3 days later remembering the names of their grandchildren. We see that like the lights come on. Many people experience this like, all right, I'm back when they get into ketosis. And then when they fall out of ketosis, the lights dim again. And so if we can get them there, keep them there, get the brain healing benefits, oftentimes we can also see that sustained. It just depends on the individual.
With the ketosis, and just for listeners, what does that entail? What kind of diet does that look like? How do people eat and get them into?
Great question. So on my website, Solcere, SOLCERE.com, we have a keto diet guide. And also in my book, Reversing Alzheimer's, the longest chapter is about getting into ketosis because it's where we get the most questions and people are looking for the most support. It's also, I think it probably does about 50% of the heavy lifting, changing your diet. You can't out exercise a shitty diet. We are what we eat. So we have to be willing to change what we put into our bodies. Now, we also need to be able to digest and absorb and assimilate and let go of what doesn't serve us. So treating the gut as any good functional medicine provider like you would do is an important component of this. But what we eat is crucially important. A ketogenic diet requires carb restriction. I don't want to focus so much on what we're cutting out, but that is the crucial component of this. We won't get into ketosis if we don't cut out carbohydrates. And people will say, does that mean fruit's not healthy? It's not that fruit isn't healthy, but fruit tends to raise our blood sugar. And so our goal is to keep our blood sugar really low. It's essentially a fasting mimicking diet. And when we completely cut out carbs or cut them down to at least 30 to 50 grams per day, spread out, you can't have all of that at once, otherwise that'll raise your blood sugar. But when we cut our carbs down significantly, over the course of about 72 hours, our body will flip that switch and start burning fat for fuel. What we want to do is make sure we have plenty of fats coming into the system. And many of us, especially my ladies over 65 who I treat who are at risk of dementia, They remember that food pyramid from the 80s and 90s where it was like carbs were the foundation of your diet and fats were up at the top and they were evil. Where essentially we're flipping that on its head and we're saying, no, we want you to get an abundant amount of fats, good, high quality fats like olive oil, butter, ghee, grass fed, any animal products. We're really aiming for organic, grass finished, all A2 dairy if we're going to do dairy, if you're not lactose intolerant. There's a lot of good healthy fats like olives, olive oil, avocados, avocado oil, coconut and coconut products and coconut oil, although not coconut water that has glucose in it. And that will raise your blood sugar. But getting these really good, high quality fats, nuts, seeds, high fiber, all our cruciferous veggies, our leafy green veggies, asparagus and artichoke and green beans. Like if it's green and it grows out of the ground, more or less, yes. The answer is yes. But we want to reduce our starchy veggies. We don't want to have a ton of carrots or beets. You can have a little bit, but too much will raise blood sugar. Lots of mushrooms. Mushrooms are fantastic for the brain. So we want to go in the direction of lots and lots of unprocessed foods, lots of veggies, lots of green stuff, and plenty of fats and protein. So we recommend, of course, salmon, anchovies, sardines. These are high quality omega-3s that you can get from your diet. And then with people who've been eating chicken breast, I recommend that they go to chicken thighs, organic, of course, have a little bit less of the lean meats. We've always thought of the lean meats as being the best for us, but actually having a little bit more fat will give us the substrate that we need to create the ketones.
I'd love to hear you say this because I do weight loss and I have flipped that. I feel like the food pyramid did a lot of damage. And we're all brainwashed into thinking to as few calories as humanly possible and stay away from fat. And I'm like, no, you want to like have some halibut fried in butter. And they're like, no, what? Like, that's like, it's turning out on their head. And I'm like, no, you got to eat. You have to eat.
Someone should go to jail for that food pyramid. I mean, it was so wrong and people have died and suffered because of it. I mean, it was criminal.
Yeah. Now, you also talk about an anti-Alzheimer's garden. Can you talk about what that is and what plants that you mean are the most beneficial for brain health?
So the herbs and spices are fantastic. They're mildly antimicrobial. They're good fiber. They're good polyphenols, great and plant nutrients. So like rosemary is one of my favorites, garlic, oregano, dill. I made this dill dip yesterday that was so tasty. And all of these plant nutrients, cilantro is great for detox. You can make a salad out of it and it's so flavorful. Arugula, zucchini is really easy to grow. Sometimes people who have planted zucchini will be like, oh yeah, I know how that is. I have to like give it to my neighbors because there's so much zucchini at certain times of the year. But zucchini works for most people on a ketogenic diet. So it's a great thing to make noodles, like zoodles out of. So easy to grow. Hopefully your neighbors like it too. But you can essentially make like spaghetti, make a noodle dish, but make it out of zoodles or zucchini noodles. And that will keep your carb count low enough that you can get into ketosis. There are so many things that we can grow that I think we don't realize. Green onions add so much flavor and are so yummy. We have gardens at Marama. We grow blueberries. Blueberries, usually you can eat a handful of blueberries and stay in ketosis. Depending on where you stand with nightshades, some bell peppers can be a crunchy, nice snack and to basically use instead of chips or something to put into dips. We also use cucumbers, celery, we grow. So there's lots of fun ways to grow delicious food if you're up for it and turn that into these amazing meals. I think it's so much more satisfying when we're growing food and then giving it away or making meals out of it. It's just you get to see that whole spectrum instead of getting your processed thing that's so disconnected from where it came from the grocery store or from a fast food or something. When you go through that whole process, it just gives you this appreciation. Plus, you're just getting your hands on the dirt. It's so human. It's so grounding. And there's a lot of community aspects for many people, but just getting out in the garden, so many people have that experience of like, I feel better after. I feel it's like a meditative practice. It's also a physical practice. I was weeding my backyard recently, and the next day I was like, ow, I'm sore from all the squats.
That's funny. All right, I want to talk about your book that released Reversing Alzheimer's and New York Times bestselling. So what did you decide to put into the book and how did you decide what were the key strategies that you needed to get in there that you wanted people to know about?
Yeah, so this book came out of the coaching programs that we've done over the past several years. We've basically coached about 250 people through a 12-week program. And so I had set up these modules, these 11 modules, and we had an extra 12th week to do our introductions and then also to kind of wrap things up. And so in these 12 modules that I had created, basically turned into the book. But what we did is, as we were turning them into the book, we were getting all the feedback from these 250 participants who had joined us on this 12-week program. And so the book is the upgrade from that original program. And it's the FAQs and it's the different pieces, which includes the diet and the exercise and how to create routines. This program is fundamentally, it's about the decisions that we make every day. What changes the trajectory of our health as we age? It's what we decide to put in our mouth. It's how much movement we decide to get. It's what time we go to bed. It's how we manage our stress. It's our daily routines that make the biggest impact. And so the goal of the book can sometimes feel like a daunting and complex protocol, especially for someone struggling with cognitive decline, right? Changing our diet at any stage of life, even with perfect cognition, can feel overwhelming. And so my goal with the book was really to make it accessible and doable, and to talk through a lot of what we found from the coaching made it more accessible and more doable. So what are our routines? Where do we make changes? And I recommend like for where to start, because many people are like, you just said diet, exercise, stress, and sleep. Like what? Where do I go? And often when I list those, something comes up for people. They're like, I know where I need to start. I know that I've been sedentary too long, or I know I've been eating the standard American diet and somebody's been giving me a hard time about that for a long time. Or I know my sleep schedule is off and that's why I wake up tired every morning and I can't make the great food decisions or get exercise or reach out to my loved ones because I'm exhausted. Usually people know there's like some hit that's, yep, that's the thing for me. And so I recommend just starting with one, just starting where you know it's either easy. So sometimes getting a win. I know I could get to sleep 30 minutes earlier and I would wake up feeling better. Start tonight with what you already know. And then take that momentum and learn a little bit more and then layer these things on top of each other. I love it. I have patients, some patients are like Darlene and her husband, right? They come in and they're all in and they do it all at once. And that's what we did in the clinical trial. Sometimes I'll have other providers say, well, do you start with detox or do you start with gut health? And I'm like, no, it's not like that. We do all of it because we're asking for a miracle. We're asking to reverse someone's Alzheimer's or someone's cognitive decline on the way to Alzheimer's. We need to do all of this yesterday. But if somebody's in that luxury of prevention, we can go a little slower. And where I like to start are routines. We all have a morning routine. We all have a bedtime routine. What can we attach to that? Whether it's exercise, a meditation practice, a prayer practice, maybe it's fasting before bed for 3 hours as part of our bedtime routine so that we get better sleep. And maybe it's taking better care of our teeth, like by brushing and flossing more often. Whatever we can attach to those bookends of our day is kind of how I think of them. It's like the ends of our day where we all have a routine. And that routine may be serving us, it might not be serving us. And so if we can get intentional about it and attach it to something we already do, it's more likely to happen. I mean, I know this from my own personal experience. If I'm like, oh yeah, at lunch, I'll do this new thing, I'll get some exercise, it never happens. But if I do it at the beginning of the day, or if I do it at the end of the day before I go to bed, it's more likely to get incorporated into my day-to-day routine. So you asked what's in the book, and then I went on about routines. But essentially, we go through exercise, diet, activities, sleep, how to partner with a provider, and what labs to get, what tests to run, what supplements to maybe consider. So we talk through all of that. And a lot of it is through the lens of coaching. How does this apply to me? Where am I starting? Where do I want to go with each of these considerations? And then also, where am I on the spectrum? So we have ideas and brainstorms for activities if you're in prevention stage, if you're in early to moderate cognitive decline, or if you're supporting someone with more severe decline.
And the strategies, are they vastly different from if you're, let's say, early cognitive decline versus a more advanced stage?
Well, not the strategy overall, no, is the same. So like Dr. Bredesen talks about getting cognoscopy in your 40s. A cognoscopy, kind of like a colonoscopy, let's assess and evaluate your risk of developing dementia before you have it so that we can get ahead of it. And so we would do the same labs, but as I mentioned, when we're in prevention, it's more luxurious. We can kind of take our time. We don't have to work as hard, as fast as if we're trying to reverse someone's diagnosed Alzheimer's. So, for example, when it comes to exercise, we talk a lot about dual task exercises. So, dual as in two, DUAL. We want to be engaging cognitively at the same time as physically. Now, for someone with full-blown Alzheimer's, this might be very simple, like the simplest chair yoga, right hand versus left hand, like trying to keep up with the cues. It might be as simple as walking and talking with someone they love. For somebody, a practicing provider who's hopefully pretty cognitively with it, this might be listening to a complex podcast while we're on the rowing machine or on the Peloton or going for a run. It might be starting a new sport like pickleball, where there's social engagement, maybe you're outdoors, there's hand-eye coordination, there's strategy, and there's physical movement. So for dual task exercise, you want to be at about 75, 85% of cognitive engagement and physical engagement. That's really different for someone in their 40s versus someone who's 85 already struggling with pretty severe cognitive decline. And it's dynamic. It'll change over time.
So these protocols aren't just for people with cognitive decline. This is to prevent cognitive decline as well.
Yeah, really to optimize cognitive function and improve brain health wherever you are on that spectrum.
And is this what you do so you have a clinic practice as well, correct?
Yeah, I have a clinical practice. That's where we did the research. So all the research that we've done is not in the residential care facility. That's also a luxury when we can put people in a controlled environment and feed them and get them exercise and social engagement all kind of in under one roof. And what we see in the literature, what we published is all on people who lived at home and who implemented this independently. So it definitely works in both scenarios. And the clinical practice is just that medical piece. It's not the residential piece. It's not that immersive experience. It's basically giving people a list of things to do at home. And then, they take the supplements and get themselves organized and do the exercise and optimize their sleep and all of those pieces.
So now you own an assisted living facility called Marama. And that's exactly what this is putting into practice, your clinical practice in a community assisted living system.
So, Catie, it's such an interesting experience, right? Because it's not rocket surgery, right? We're just taking the best in class, the best of what the science says about the lifestyle that supports people with cognitive decline. And we're putting that lifestyle, we're making it the default in a memory care facility. And so what we're hoping to do, Marama, is we're kind of shifting our model and we are going towards licensing the concept to existing senior living facilities because that's the way we think we can get this to as many people as possible across the country. A lot of the feedback we were getting, that's actually why we started the coaching, is because the only facility in the world doing it was us here in San Diego. And so people were coming from New York and Florida, and they wanted to come from the UK and from Australia and Hawaii, and people were moving here from all over the place, but they were so far away from their loved ones. So our goal is for there to be a Marama in every major city in the US. And the way that we hope to do that is by partnering with existing assisted living facilities. And that's what we've successfully done at our campus in Kansas. So they have a larger assisted living facility, and we have a unit with a dedicated kitchen. And people are engaged in all of the activities in that unit. There's 16 people who live there. And we've had great success. We've only been open there for a little over a year. And of the 6 residents who have been there for more than 6 months, 5 of them have improved their cognition.
Wow. Yeah, I'm looking at it. It looks gorgeous. Looks like a nice place to stay.
But that was the goal. I really wanted to create something where I would want to live there, right? Because no one wants to move into assisted living. Nobody likes the idea.
It's like they purposely made it so awful that it just seems so simple to create a toxin-free environment. I mean, it's really sad that that has to be like a goal of these facilities.
Yeah, it's interesting. I really hope it becomes the standard that we can really shift people. And if one of your listeners is here thinking, oh, my mom or my spouse or somebody I know or love is looking at memory care or assisted living, when you call and ask, use these questions. Do you have a brain healthy diet? Do you offer brain engaging activities? And if so, how much staff do you have to facilitate that? Do you have exercise that's safe and available to my loved one? Do you use non-toxic cleaning products that aren't neurotoxic? You can ask these questions now. And when consumers ask, these assisted living facilities, they want people to move in. They want to deliver on the care that someone expects. And so whenever somebody asks that question, we start to see a movement in what's available.
Right. Yeah, I actually had to get rid of my house cleaners because the chemicals they were using to clean, I made me sick every time I came home and my house was clean. And I'm like, I can't stay here though. It's so awful, these products. I don't know, so. All right. So do you have new protocols or innovative protocols that are being developed at this point that you try out at Marama, or what kind of outcomes are you guys seeing?
So the outcomes, we're seeing that most people improve. Now, not everyone. This is not guaranteed. There's no way that we could guarantee this. But most people, if they're willing to engage, if they're willing to take this, swallow the supplements, pay for it, it's not free, then most people improve, both in the clinic when they're doing it independently at home and at Marama in the residential care setting. So the odds are pretty good. Now, of course, we are much more confident when people start earlier, when they're younger, when they're less progressed in the disease process, and when they're willing to do it all. It's much harder if they say are immobilized and we can't do the exercise and we have to depend on the cognitive engagement and the diet and the environment, and we don't have the movement piece. We're not going to see as great of results. So it's exciting when we have people show up and they're all in. That's really helpful.
So someone like Darlene, who started out at 2 and went to 7, was that an outlier, or is that something that could be expected? And how much improvement can they make?
That's such a great question. I went to Dr. Bredesen a few years into the Marama experiment, essentially, after we had created the residential care facility. And I was like, you wouldn't believe it. People keep getting better. They've been here for 3 years and she just keeps getting better. And he was like, oh yeah, well, it's like a spiral. You're like spiraling up. When you have more healthy neurons, then you get more healthy neurons. I kind of thought that people would go up and then they would plateau. And we don't prevent death, right? Like people have come in and then they end up with cancer, something happens and a fall. We can't prevent all of the things associated with aging. That still happens sometimes and it's heartbreaking and it's horrible. But what we see is oftentimes, even when cognition doesn't improve, people get off of their antihypertensives, they get off of their diabetes medications, they get off of their antidepressants, they're more engaged, they're more present, they are connecting with their loved ones. How often, is Darlene an outlier? In the past year, I've seen 2 patients, or year and a half or so, I've seen 2 patients with MoCA scores of 8 go up to almost double that. So they start with single-digit MoCA scores and they improve significantly. Again, my confidence goes up if they have a great care team around, if they're younger, if they're earlier on in the disease process, and if they're all in. That being said, one of these women is 87. She's doing awesome and she lives alone. What I've learned, Catie, is not to tell someone there's no hope, because I've had patients prove me wrong over and over again. We have a woman, she moved into Marama and she was at a MoCA score, I think, of 12. Her family decided they wanted her at home. She was doing phenomenally well. I think her MoCA score went up to 22. Her family decided they wanted her at home because she was doing so well. And culturally, I think they just wanted to take care of mom. Then her son ended up needing to travel a lot for work. There wasn't anybody around to kind of keep her engaged in the program. And her MoCA score slid back down to, I think, 8.5. It got pretty low. And so they moved her back into the Kansas facility. And sure enough, now she's back at a MoCA score of 23. And we're like, when she's on the program, it works. She just gets better and better and better. But when she's not, she goes downhill, which is really sad, but it's indicative that the program is working. There are cases where people don't get better. Even they have MoCA scores of 19. And I have a lot of confidence. If somebody comes in with a MoCA score of 19, I'm like, we should be able to help you. And it's not always that we can, even when we've thrown everything at it. One of my favorite things about Dr. Bredesen, he's like, Heather, tell me who's not getting better, because we're probably just missing something. And those are the cases that we can use to upgrade the protocol and make things better. So we use red light therapy. In the book, there's a kind of looking ahead chapter where we talk about peptides and red light therapy, some of the technologies, the contrast oxygen therapy, stem cells, exosomes, stuff like that, that's kind of on the horizon, that I hope as we have more research and maybe more accessibility, maybe the cost will come down and more people will get access to that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking at the Marama food and it looks really good. And you can never say that about any facility. This looks like a nice restaurant. I want to go.
Not usually. Well, we've had residents who have eaten in Michelin star restaurants around the world. And they're like, the food here is just as good and very satisfying. I like arrange my time so that I can go over there when it's mealtime and, and have chef give me a plate. They've done such a great job. We're so lucky.
So, what do you think are the most promising areas of Alzheimer's research or treatment that you think will shape the future of cognitive care?
There are these new medications on the market, basically. So Leqembi or lecanemab, aducanumab, that was taken off the market. It was pretty expensive. And then there's donanemab, which is newer, the Eli Lilly medication. And these all are the monoclonal antibodies that are delivered by IV. And unfortunately, they have pretty high risk profiles. So they can cause brain bleeding and brain swelling, which needs to be managed carefully and monitored throughout the use of the medication. And those medications, they don't improve cognition. So like what we were talking about, the research that's been done in the functional medicine space by Dr. Bredesen and I and his group, and then also by Dr. Dean Ornish, that was less functional medicine, more lifestyle intervention, that created improvements in cognition. Those interventions are associated with meaningful improvements in cognition. The medications are not. They are associated with a slowing of the decline. So you get worse 30% slower, right? So it doesn't stop the decline. You just get worse more slowly. So it draws out this torturous process. Now, to be fair, these are first generation medications. What they do is they take the amyloid out. And I can see a future where these medications get better and we're using them in conjunction with this functional medicine perspective of asking that question about why those amyloid plaques are there to begin with. What triggered them? So we know that toxins, infections, nutrient imbalances can trigger the production of those plaques and tangles, signaling issues. And so ideally what we would do is couple these strategies. We would get to the causal level and we might be able to kind of clean out the amyloid plaque and hopefully help more people more consistently who are further along in the disease process. And my goal, I hope in my lifetime, we can see that this disease becomes rare and optional, basically, that we would prevent it before it even happens. And I think part of what helps people motivate around prevention is seeing recovery, is seeing people improve, because it's much harder to prove prevention.
I would love to see that too. I like that optional, to see that the disease become optional. So as we wrap up today, what do you think has been the most rewarding aspect of your work in Alzheimer's?
Hands down, it's when a patient says, or a patient's adult child says, I got my mom back. Hearing the stories of this Christmas, my mom was present again after being dejected and in the corner and not having conversations. She'd been a host her entire life. And Christmas of 2022, she was in the corner, not talking to anybody. And the next Christmas, 2023, she's picking out age-appropriate gifts for her grandkids and she's watching them open them and she's cooking one or two dishes and she's inviting people over and the cousins are like, oh my gosh, Auntie, you're back. And have the daughters come in and be like, we got mom back. And she was present and there for Christmas. We got another Christmas with her and we'll have those memories forever and the grandkids will too. Like that is by far, hands down, why I get out of bed in the morning, is because I want more of those.
It's like you've just turned Alzheimer's disease into like a great field to go into, because previously it felt like a dead end.
Catie, thanks for saying that. I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't go into neurology or don't go into treating or even geriatrics, right? Because they're like, well, that sounds horrible, right? There's nothing we can really do. I'm going to take your driver's license away and I'll see you in a year to measure your decline. Like that's not a very fulfilling or rewarding career. So I hadn't even actually thought about that. So thank you for saying that. I hope that this does inspire. I actually tell that to naturopathic doctors when I speak at those medical conferences. Is like, I really think that naturopaths have the toolkit that we're the best trained to provide this sort of care out of school to this population, which is only growing in terms of numbers. But yeah, I hadn't really thought about like how maybe more people, more providers will go in this direction because it is really fun, at least for me.
I'm interested. All right. So Dr. Sandison, where can people find you? Where can they get your book?
Yeah, so anywhere books are sold, it's available. And drheathersandison.com is a great place to join our newsletter. We'll keep you up to date about the science. And then also, if you order the book, we have a bunch of bonuses. So just head to either reversingalzheimersbook.com or drheathersandison.com to follow the links. And we've got video summaries, a workbook that accompanies the book, and also some of the best interviews that we've done with Mark Hyman, David Perlmutter, my mentor, Dr. Bredesen, and others.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing this with us today.
Such a privilege to be here with you, Catie. Thank you.
Beyond the Medical Algorithm is brought to you by the Philly Wellness Center. To find out more about the Philly Wellness Center and how we're challenging conventional medical wisdom and shedding light on more natural means of healing and therapy, visit phillywellnesscenter.com. And then make sure to search for Holistic Health in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at the Philly Wellness Center, keep celebrating the innate power in our incredible bodies, and thanks for listening.